Welcome back. I'm excited to preview our afternoon, but before I do, two more thank yous for me. The first is to our newest advisory board member for the Black Economic Alliance, Mr. David Clooney. David Clooney, wait, hold your applause for a moment. We're clapping for him for that, but mostly what we're clapping for is that David Clooney, as most of you know, was the executive director of the Black Economic Alliance. And when we talk about what the organization has accomplished over these years, it is truly in part to David's leadership. And I'm also just incredibly grateful to have him as a good friend. So thank you, David. Now we can clap. And then the other person I want to say thank you to is the First Lady of the state of Maryland, Ms. Dawn Moore. So, what you likely know is that, well, this is the better half, but the other half of the Moore family, now Governor Wes Moore, was a BEA board member and ran explicitly on a work, wages, and wealth campaign and agenda now that he is governing for the state of Maryland. And to see what's possible when the brilliance of Mr. and Mrs. Moore and the BEA board come together to think about what real change looks like, how we create the policy ideas and then activate literally within hours of being in office, a set of policy changes, a budget that reflects those priorities is, for me, a North Star for what this work can look like when we do it right. So we value your friendship, we value your thought partnership, we value being here today, and we are all here, as you know, not just in your corner, but sitting right by your side, so thank you. Yes. So thus far today, we've gotten a sense of the scope and the depth of the challenges and where they came from and why they're so sticky. We also were able to hear from some leading thinkers about the perspective that we need to have as we are approaching solutions. And now, as we turn to the afternoon, we're going to start to think about what implementation looks like. How do we apply what we know is working, isn't working, what we know Black communities uniquely need when it comes to building wealth, when we think about how we implement across the corporate, the philanthropic, and the public sector. And you all are leaders in your companies, in your organizations, in whatever sector you reside in. And so our ask for you today is, as you're thinking, while these speakers are engaging and sharing their leadership and their interventions, that when you're catching us in the hallway afterwards, or you're talking with folks at the reception at the end of the day, that the question that you ask and the question that they're able to ask back to you is, so what do we all go and do about this together? And what have we learned so far about what's not working yet, so that when we are back at it tomorrow, that we're implementing with all of that in mind. But before we turn to implementation, we have one final deep dive, this time into workforce development. And so I'd love to introduce to the stage Kwasi Mitchell, Chief Purpose Officer at Deloitte, Plinio Ayala, President and CEO at Perscolis, Debbie Dyson, the CEO of 110, and our moderator, Shavar Jeffries, the CEO of the KIP Foundation. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
All right, we're going to jump right in because we got a real tight time frame. So we're going to jump right in with Plinio. If you could please give an overview of workforce development and talk about its role in wealth building and economic prosperity in the Black community.
Sure. I've attended a lot of conferences, but this is the first time I've attended an event where my name was that large on the screen. So I just need to take it in for a second. All right, I'm good. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you for having me. It's customary at Perscolis that when we have a funder or an employer visit that we invite some of our learners into that meeting. And it was during one of those meetings that I met a young man by the name of Haji Peace. He had been working as a food processor at a plant in Chicago. And like millions of Americans, when the pandemic hit, he lost his job. Couldn't find another one. Found this free training program, a 15-week program that allowed him to attain IT skills and move into work. And so he was sharing this experience with us. He was talking about how he had gotten his second certification already, 13 weeks into the program. And then he shared with us that he had become homeless halfway through the program. And he was embarrassed to share that with the team, but when he did, they all jumped into action and got him to the finish line. Haji, I'm proud to report, is about to finish his apprenticeship opportunity at Bank of America. He is likely to be hired in the next month, and as he said to me recently, I'm about to make more money than I've ever made before. We will train 5,000 people this year, all in IT. 87% of those individuals, people of color, 60% of those individuals, Black Americans. Individuals just like that young man who's not looking for a handout, he's looking for an opportunity. He just needs that one chance that could change everything. That's exactly what we do as a workforce development organization, is provide an alternative pathway to not just a job, but a good paying career. 85% of our students will graduate, 80% will get jobs, and the impact is humongous. Our graduates earn 3 times more than what they were earning prior to training, and the social return is even greater. A third-party think tank reported that for every dollar invested in Perscolas, there's an $8 return to society. So I'm not an economist and I'm not a banker, but that's 800%. So I think that's pretty good. Shavar, what do you think?
I think that's great. Thank you, Plinio. Debbie, would you mind talking about how 110 is working to bridge the gap between talent in the Black community and good paying jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, we're already making progress because my title is actually CEO. So yeah, so while we've been sitting here, this is what we call progress. So about two and a half weeks ago, I stepped into the CE role for 110. So I think you heard earlier, because I think it's worth repeating, what is 110 all about? So 110, 1 million jobs in 10 years for Black talent without a 4-year degree into careers with family-sustaining roles with a skill-first approach. Just think about that for a minute. It's pretty powerful, but if you take it one step further and why this was necessary, 76% of the jobs domestically in the US for a salary of $60,000 or more require a 4-year degree. And 75% of Black talent in the US do not have a 4-year degree. So if you think about those numbers, you can understand why the mission is so critically important for 110 and what we're trying to go about. 110 to me is about disrupting the traditional way we want to hire and how we think about talent acquisition. Talent acquisition is not easy by any means. So this to me, 110 is about a movement. It's not an initiative. An initiative to me has a short span. It's like check the box. A movement is life-changing, and it's sustainable. That's what 110 is all about, and we want to be the catalyst for that change. So the way that we're going about it, you heard Brian earlier from Bank of America talk about it. This is getting large Fortune 500 companies to join the coalition. Charles mentioned earlier there's about 70 plus large companies that joined 2.5 years ago that said we want to be part of this change. But we need to grow that. I said Fortune 500. I just mentioned 70. It's a small number, but we're making progress. We've asked those employers to take a look at your jobs and do some re-credentialing. Instead of those jobs requiring a degree, 60% of jobs out there do not need a 4-year degree. Now look, by no means are we saying don't get an education, but this is about trying to close opportunity gaps. And this is a path that we see as really, really meaningful. Plinio talked about, we're partnering with, this is an ecosystem, so we need employers to get the demand for the jobs. We need talent developers and partners to come to the table and say, we're going to help you skill up, give you skills. If anybody's on Twitter, and if you're looking, former President Barack Obama actually did a tweet. So we got a little 110 shout out from the president. I'm like, woohoo! Pretty exciting, but talked about, hey, states and government, open up your minds to looking at skills as an alternative path for opportunity. And then the last piece of this that I think is essential is actually talent themselves. This is a big leap of faith. If you're talking Black talent, we're telling them now, hey, put your trust in an organization like 110 and companies where Perscolas is doing great work, and we will open up opportunities for you and give you the skills necessary to give you a career, not a job, a career. that allows you to get into the seat, get promoted, and retained. And that's what we're all about. We're on a good path. We've got about 70,000 or so jobs thus far, close to 100. But this is early in the journey. We're, again, near 2.5 or so. So, we need support from many of you in the room. But it's an exciting time. And again, this is about a movement, not just an initiative.
Debbie, could you go a little bit further? I'm curious, I know some, including me, I know others are concerned about the extent to which these Fortune 500 companies will really make career opportunities available to Black young people without a college degree, because we often know oftentimes Black folks gonna have more credentials than others to kind of get their foot in the door and build. I'd love if you could talk about the experience you've seen with the companies you've worked with in making these opportunities real, where they're sustainable and Black young people can not only have a job, but build toward a career. I mean, any early findings that you've seen in your work, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think what I would tell you, again, there's 70 plus companies, to date. Fortune 500, and these are enterprise, this is really changing the way that they have to think. So as I already mentioned, this is about taking those opportunities and sitting down. We have, different companies that we work with and saying, for these particular jobs, what are the skill sets that you think are required? Change management, because this is, you're asking now frontline leaders to really think about when you have two candidates that are in front of you, we've heard this before, a candidate that has a 4-year degree and one without, to say, look at this a little bit differently. And what you will find, and studies have shown, that skill training is actually 5 more times likely to predict job performance than a 4-year degree. 2.5 times more likely than even just work experience when you get skills. So I think studies have shown, we've actually seen, again, B of A just talked about a lot of the great success, and we have many other great stories that I think are yielding the same results. But we're still early in the journey and still a lot of work to do.
Thank you, thank you.
And if I can just build
Yes,
off of,
absolutely.
because I'm effectively Debbie's backup singer, right? With respect to, Deloitte has been one of the initial coalition members with respect to 110. And what's been interesting about it is, if you think about really the transformation that we're talking about with talent, over the last 3 years, we've hired over 100,000 people, right? Like over 100,000 people. And if you think about just the pathways for talent into an organization such as ours, and if it's truly been equitable, because our talent processes are designed about bringing skill sets into the organization as quickly as possible. It's not necessarily designed to think about fundamentally driving equity more broadly. So when we joined 110, what was really different, and as we talk about a movement rather than a moment, we viewed that as a 10-year commitment to drive change, knowing that there was going to take several years for our organization to change its processes fundamentally to really live to all of the standards of 110 in and of itself. The other item that I'd point out is that, like, we fundamentally know that when we sit back and we look at the skill sets and what we need several years out from a talent perspective, that's not all being taught at universities right now, right? Like that a credential with a highly motivated, young talent can in fact be put into a position where they can grow within an organization and have a career. And so it's really a bridging of the gap, and really the transformation that large organizations need to really understand that there's multiple pathways to come into the workforce rather than a traditional 4-year degree.
Maybe you could build a bit on that, Kwasi. I'm curious what the conversation are like with, the department heads, the hiring leads in your organization. Is this something that you're finding people really receptive and bought into? Is this where, hey, leadership in corporate is forcing me to do this? Would love to hear you talk about the extent to which folks really bought into thinking about hiring differently along these lines.
Yeah, I would say the conversations are what you would expect. Like it's an amazing vision. If you say, hey, we're going to do this, it's the right thing to do, everybody's like, okay. And then they realize it's hard, right? Because there's aspects of, hey, what happens if, the person that you've employed, for example, one of our hires, was moving from one state to another, needed a new car and asked for a loan specifically around, I need a new car to be able to relocate. And all of a sudden, I'm on the phone, figuring out how to give a loan to someone who doesn't yet work for us, which is not within our policies. And so those types of things are what people are working through now, that we believe in it, but there's just new things that we're facing when you have somebody who is coming from a non-traditional background, quote unquote, in comparison to what we used to hire from, let's say, since we mentioned Princeton earlier today.
Right. Building on that, Plinio, can you talk a bit about how can workforce development help Black young people who disproportionately are educated in K12 school systems that don't serve them well? And particularly to the extent we're talking about young people who aren't going to college, that tends to even skew more to young people who may not have the full suite of skills that some of these Fortune 500 companies might be looking for. Would love to hear you talk about how are you working to bridge any of those gaps so that as young people who aren't on the college pathway are trying to enter these corporate spaces, that they're ready to be successful in these job opportunities.
Yeah, I like to define or redefine non-traditional, right? Most people don't go to college. That's the traditional path in this country. And I think it's quite unfortunate for a number of reasons. College has become quite unaffordable. When you look at the data, tuition has doubled in this century alone. Every year is about a 7% increase in tuition costs. People from my community can't afford to do that. And if they do, they're taking out a bunch of debt. And this implied promise that you get a degree that translates to a good paying job is no longer true. And so they're taking on that debt, getting an associate's or a bachelor's degree and not able to get into work. And many of those individuals come to us for that last mile training. I think as a nation, we need to redefine what post-secondary education really means, to include alternative pathways like what we do at Perscolis, effective, proven models that allow individuals in a very short-term period of time acquire the skills that employers are saying they need. I think part of the success of our organization is that we build all of our training with employers in mind. They're in the middle of everything that we do. They design curriculum, they create our assessment tools, and then we hold them accountable to hire our graduates when they're done. And this, by the way, this is not about altruism. This is about a business imperative. Employers are looking for this talent. And if they can do the job, a 4-year degree shouldn't be the barrier why they shouldn't be hired.
And Debbie, at 110, we'd love to hear you speak to this too in terms of that bridge between, where a lot of our Black students are coming out of K12 and then connecting them with these opportunities where they can be successful.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. One of the things that's been a little bit of an epiphany is as we think about Black talent and they go out to this career marketplace and we do matches. They complete a resume, they complete a profile, and we say based off of A, B, and C. But one of the things that hit me a little bit is that there's an element of trust that is lacking in the Black community of why should I believe in something that has been so ingrained, just in terms of just years, decades and decades, that education was the golden ticket. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is really sort of educate around, while that may be an alternative, this is another opportunity, and not to sort of downplay it. Because you will have people that are actually working today, very experienced, an older workforce that does not have a degree. We want them to see the possibility to get into, again, this is family sustaining. This isn't just any job, it is family sustaining, a means to provide for your family. So there is a little bit of this trust factor that I think we're trying to hone in on that I really do think has become a bit of a barrier, but I think we're starting to make some real meaningful progress there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'd love to hear the panel talk about that. How do you communicate and message to Black communities and families that this isn't a lowering of expectations, that this isn't a situation where wealthy white folks will go to the college path and they'll get to white-collar jobs and true wealth-building opportunities, whereas there can be a perception that for Black students, once again, people want to steer Black young people to a non-college, some might claim a perceived vocational pathway. So Kwasi, maybe you can speak to that. How do you resolve that and message this in a way where people can see the opportunity here?
Directly and openly, right? I think we've done a good job of being very transparent with respect to people that this is where you start, right? But there's pathways for you to continue to advance in the organization. In fact, one of our 110 hires we recently featured, and she spoke to the fact that her manager on day one, and as she grew within the organization, and it's been with us for, I think, collectively maybe 6 months now, is talking about what's next for her rather than like her sole role right now. So we've been doing a good job, and I think other people who are members of the coalition truly understand that the entryway through 110 is just the launching point, right? It's not It's not the zenith of anybody's career, and we have, the tools and infrastructure to help people advance.
Plinio, love you to speak.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think, I don't know many 18-year-olds that know what they want to do for the rest of their career, right? And yet we tell them you got to go to college and figure it out in 2 years, right? Declare a major, figure it out. I think there are various paths to get there. So this isn't a question of either or. This is a question of when is the right time for you. And it could be that you build a career at a particular firm and then they pay for your college, right? Or you have a better understanding of what it is that you want to build a career around and study that, right? So being a product of traditional post-secondary education, I see the value of that. However, I would submit that if I had waited a couple of more years, I probably would have gotten a degree in something different, right? I got a degree, nothing against American Studies major. I love reading, John Steinbeck. But it really didn't prepare me for the world of work. And so, if I had waited a little longer, if my mom would have allowed me, I probably would have chosen a different career. So again, this is meeting people where they are and building a pathway for them so that at some point, traditional post-secondary education could be a real possibility.
Debbie, we have in this room, leaders in business, in government, a variety of different, domains in the country. What can the leaders in this room do to advance this conversation so that there are more pathways to economic prosperity for Black young people beyond what some have viewed as the traditional college route?
Well, I mean, the obvious is like join the coalition. So, I mean, again, as I already mentioned, we have 70 plus members, large companies, but for this to become a reality of 1 million jobs, we need much more. So that's one path. The other would be, again, I think we were talking about, like, how do you help Black talent see the possibility as an alternative solution? So I think there's a little bit about the messaging, like lean in, go out onto the website, take a look at it. There are talent partners, there are talent developers, there are things in the community. Community colleges is an absolutely wonderful path to explore also. So I think this is about getting a message out and really starting to lean in and open yourself up to, again, this sort of non-traditional way of thinking that skills first does provide another opportunity to meet you, where you're at, if now, isn't the time.
Kwasi, Deloitte is in. What can we do to get many, many more corporations involved in this movement?
I think we just need to tell the stories of the people that we're impacting, right? Like when you think about the notion of 110, they're impressive numbers, but the people aren't numbers, right? And as we tell those stories, I think it becomes very, very easy for other employers to lean in and decide that this is worth the effort, and it's really the play that we need to have a well-functioning, equitable, society more broadly. So tell stories. We started off with a great story. Debbie, you probably have 10,000 great stories, and we just need to continue to do so.
Great, Plinio.
Yeah, I think that I alluded to this earlier. This is not about doing a good thing. This is about doing the right thing from an economic standpoint. If we're talking about this 3 years from now with an altruistic slant to it, I think we're failing. The browning of America has begun. Studies show that, right? By 2040 something, the majority of this nation will be people of color. And we know, and I know this much from my economics class, right, that the vibrancy of America's economy is pretty much dependent on a very strong middle class. We need to be very intentional in moving as many individuals like Haji into opportunities that lead them to the middle class. Otherwise, 20 years from now, we're going to be lamenting that we've done tremendous damage to our economy.
Well, maybe with the last question, I'd love to hear the panel speak to what, a year from now, 5 years from now, what would an optimal place be for us to be as it relates to this conversation? We'll start with Debbie. Debbie.
Sorry,
Debbie.
I'm
Yes.
like leaning back. So I'll keep this succinct. So I was at ADP for 34 years, and in June of 2022, I retired. So I was like, I'm good, I'll need to work again. I'm just gonna kind of kick back. And it was going to take something special and spectacular to pull me out of retirement. So here comes 110, special and spectacular. So the way that I see it, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, I'd like to be retired again. That's my answer. So, so if we get this right, it's I'm retired because it worked, not because it failed, so to speak. And I mean that in all seriousness. Like, we would like 110, clearly I'd like it to continue to exist. But I hopefully will be sitting here that this is just sort of sustainable and it's just woven into the fabric of how we think. And you almost don't need a 110. So, you know, somewhat joking, yes, I'd like to be retired, but for all the right reasons, opposed to the wrong.
In 5 years, you think we can get there in 5 years?
Well, we've got 7 to go, so you know. We'll get there.
Kwasi.
I think that we need, 5 years from now, we need more engines for collective action, like BEA, right? Just full stop, right? Like there's so many people in roles similar to mine who are looking for investments or things that we can do individually as companies. And no individual company is going to solve the challenges in front of us. So 5 years from now, I think our success is dependent upon like the success that we're creating in this room today, and really all of the great things that BEA and what under Sam's leadership have been able to drive thus far.
Great, great. Plinio?
Yeah, we talk about changing the face of technology. In 10 years, I'd like to walk into a boardroom for a technology company and see a bunch of brown and black people, right, leading the charge. I think that for me would be a huge victory. I don't see that right now, but I think there is paths that we're creating that eventually will get us there.
Well, this is a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate, can we give this panel a round of applause, please? I surely think this is a critical conversation. So I run the KIPP Foundation. We have 120,000 kids, and the majority of our kids are not obtaining a college pathway. Really excited for this conversation to continue and to create more opportunities for our young people to actually find good jobs and build wealth. In too many communities where we operate, a lot of these places just don't exist yet. And so we're really excited for more folks in this room and other corporations and employers to join this movement so we can actually enable our young people to break cycles of poverty and build wealth. Thank you very much for this conversation. We're looking forward to the rest of the day and appreciate everything you're doing. And I'm excited for you to retire before too long as well, Jeffries.